Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stopped to wonder how we actually figure out who's in charge? Like, who legitimately has the authority to tell us what to do? In this explainer, we're unpacking a fascinating piece called The Divine Authority and the Debt to Caesar. But, before we time travel 2,000 years back to our source material, I really want to set up a mental model for how you and I process competence.
So imagine you need this incredibly complex, life-saving surgery. You're presented with two options. Surgeon A looks like they just stepped off a movie set. We're talking perfectly tailored suit, distinguished silver hair, super refined speech. Then there's Surgeon B. This one is completely unkempt, a bit overweight, sporting a 5 o'clock shadow, and honestly, speaks kind of like a butcher. Who are you putting your life in the hands of? Well, according to author Nassim Nicholas Taleb, you should actually go with Surgeon B.
And this introduces what we call the surgeon paradox. It's this powerful warning about how insanely easy it is for our brains to confuse a nice, polished costume with actual genuine ability. Think about it. If someone who looks that unpolished is allowed to operate at a world-class hospital, their real, tested skills must be so unbelievably undeniable that they completely overcome how they look. The big takeaway here is that surface appearance, it's usually a pretty terrible guide to true competence.
So, keeping that paradox in our back pocket, let's jump right into Act 1, the context.
In what the author calls Papa's take, we see this tragic human flaw laid bare. We constantly buy into these secular, power-driven narratives simply because the fake stuff just looks better on the surface. Take the first-century religious leaders in Jerusalem, for example. These guys were literally the polished surgeons of their era. They had the flowing robes, they demanded the absolute best seats in the synagogues, and they lived for those grand, sweeping greetings in the public markets. But beneath all that elaborate costume, they totally lacked true divine competence.
And right here is where we see the ultimate surgeon paradox unfold in history. On one side, you've got the slow, heavy, incredibly polished presence of the religious establishment. And on the other, Jesus of Nazareth. Look, he didn't come up through their prestigious rabbinical schools. He had absolutely zero fancy titles and no political backing whatsoever. Yet when he spoke to the crowds, his words carried this raw, disruptive, undeniable authority that absolutely terrified the establishment.
Which leads us to a massively tense confrontation right in the temple. The establishment leaders corner Jesus and they demand, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things, or who gave it to you?" Now, they weren't actually looking for an answer. No, this was a highly publicized trap. They were trying to publicly strip away his credibility in front of these massive crowds that were just hanging on his every single word.
And that brings us to Act 2, the tension. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the leaders couldn't have cared less about the actual truth. This was pure political posturing. Jesus was threatening their incredibly delicate ecosystem of status and power, so he had to be neutralized. But Jesus masterfully flips their trap upside down. He counters with an unsolvable dilemma of his own, asking them, was the ministry of John the Baptist from heaven or from man? If they say heaven, well, Jesus just asks why they didn't believe John. If they say man, they risk the crowds literally rioting because everyone firmly believed John was a true prophet.
So naturally, they take the cowardly way out and say, "We don't know." And Jesus refuses to answer them right back. But they weren't done. Next, they send in spies, acting like these super sincere truth seekers and just layering on the flattery. The Puritan commentator John Trapp described this clumsy tactic absolutely perfectly. He called it a fair glove drawn upon a foul hand. They were desperately trying to mask a murderous intent behind this perfectly tailored costume of polite curiosity.
Then they drop what they think is the ultimate trap. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Honestly, this was designed as a complete lose-lose scenario. If Jesus says yes, he instantly looks like a Roman sympathizer and loses all his support from the Jewish crowds. If he says no, the leaders can march him straight to the Roman governor to be executed for treason.
What happens next is just a brilliant illustration of clashing jurisdictions. Jesus casually asks to see a denarius, a standard Roman coin, and points out Caesar's image stamped right there on the metal. That coin represents worldly jurisdiction, right? Civic order, roads, earthly systems. But he brilliantly contrasts that piece of cold metal with the human soul, which is permanently, irrevocably stamped with the image of God. And then he delivers this absolute masterstroke that literally leaves his enemies speechless. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. With a single sentence, he totally dismantles their trap by validating our dual citizenship. Yes, we absolutely owe earthly taxes for earthly services, but our deepest, most profound allegiance, our very soul, belongs entirely to the Creator whose image we actually bear.
All right, let's connect all this in Act 3.
Jesus ties this underlying tension right back to our surgeon paradox through the parable of the tenant. He tells the story of a vineyard owner, who represents God, leasing his land to tenants, representing the religious leaders. When the owner sends his servants to collect the harvest, the tenants beat the first one, stone the second, and finally kill the owner's beloved son just to try and steal the inheritance. It's essentially a visual timeline of history, highlighting the absolute devastation that happens when you reject true authority just because it threatens your comfortable earthly power.
He wraps up by quoting a scripture about a cornerstone. This was a stone rejected by the builders because it didn't look like it fit. It didn't have that polished, expected costume. Yet it was the one piece essential to holding the entire structure together. Jesus is basically revealing that he is that rejected cornerstone, the ultimate surgeon bee. And the lesson is crystal clear here. If you dismiss someone just because they don't look the part, you're going to end up with a collapsing foundation.
Let's bring this whole explainer home in our synthesis.
So whether you're dealing with modern corporate politics or navigating your own spiritual life, this tension between shiny surfaces and real authority is everywhere. Here are the core takeaways. First, you have to look past the costume. Do not get distracted by the polished exterior. Second, always judge authority by actual merit and real results. Third, render earthly respect where it belongs. Pay your taxes, respect the laws of the land. But finally, reserve your ultimate, unwavering allegiance for God alone.
Now, Papa weaves in some brilliant, highly practical generational wisdom from his father, Papa Cuber, and his spouse, Colonel Debs. While merit and substance are what truly matter, Papa advises this. If you're trying to sell apples, make sure they look shiny. Because, let's face it, human beings are visual creatures. It is totally fine to polish the apple. You absolutely should look sharp and presentable for your team, but you have to make sure that the polish never ever replaces the actual competence.
Which leaves us with a pretty vital question to chew on today. As you navigate all the different leaders in your life, and as you honestly examine your own heart, what are you really looking for? Are you looking for the costume, or are you looking for the cornerstone? Do you place your ultimate allegiance in the shiny, easily manipulated surfaces of this world, or in the deep, fiercely tested foundation of the divine?